Hello, everyone.
One of the companies that we were
welcome to our final panel of the day. It's our panel titled AI Beyond the Final Frontier. The moderator for this panel is Tracey Freed. Tracey is the founder of Freed Law PC, where she specializes in digital media, entertainment, and technology transactions. Tracey is also an alumnus of Loyola Law School and is currently an adjunct professor here. Tracey?
Thanks. So, final panel of the day should be an awesome one. Thanks for staying, everyone. I'm going to do some really brief intros here because we have some great material to share with you, and great video and decks up here. So to my left, I have Seth Greenfield. Seth is Chief Content Officer and founder of imperson, a very, very cool company. They're developers of conversational AI technology that power imperson's premium conversational bots. Seth's been working with folks like Disney and Universal and bringing some of the most successful chatbot personalities to the market, including Miss Piggy and Doc Brown. Imperson was also a Disney accelerator company, which is very, very cool. To the left of him, we have Todd Richmond. Todd is the Director of Advanced Prototypes at the University of Southern California Institute for Creative Technologies. By night, he's a musician, a visual artist, and I like this, a conceptual troublemaker. Todd's working on a ton of really cool things, from emerging disruptive technologies and their applications for training, learning, and operations, future environments for communication and collaboration, immersive technologies, interactive education, visualization, and analytics. Thanks so much for being here, guys. So AI is what we're talking about today, and I think most people, when you say the words AI, you think of things far out into the future, and you think of usually really cool things like Star Wars and robots, and I can't wait for the day that I have like a little BB-8 or an R2-D2 following me around that I can talk to and interact with. And I also think of scary things like the evil villain, Skynet from the franchise Terminator, who's gonna kill us all. But the truth of the matter is AI is here right now, today. And so to sort of give you guys a little primer on what's happening in the space right now, how AI is interacting with our lives, transforming our lives today, I'm gonna kick it off, send it over to Todd here to lay the groundwork for us.
Thanks. Happy to be here, and as a quick callback to the last session, just to show I was paying attention. As a musician, I have gotten a check from iTunes, CD Baby, and Bandcamp. I haven't gotten a check from Spotify yet, or any of the streaming services, but that's a whole other discussion as a content producer. I wanted to back up a little bit and talk a little bit more broadly about the way we view the world right now in 2016 and where we think things are headed. AI is going to be the focus of what we're going to talk about, but I want to contextualize it in some broader things that are going on with society. We live in a time of broken time and space, and it's broken in a way that we've never quite seen before. So is this really our sort of current reality? And you don't need to hear, the audio's in Swedish. This was a commercial for a Swedish telecom company that's trying to sell you bandwidth. So they took this is a DK1 Oculus, put a webcam on it, and then they put a third of a second delay and then put someone into the physical world. And it turns out that a third of a second delay is problematic when you're trying to correlate what you're seeing and then what's going on around you with your other senses. In the corner, you can see what the person is seeing. So if you think about it, that's a third of a second delay in only one of our senses. And that's part of the break that goes on, which is if one of your senses is getting one set of signals and it's not corresponding with what you're hearing, what you're feeling, and your other sense of presence, then things start to go south really quickly, and it's something that we're going to have to sort out. But also think about your daily communication and how many delays and what types of both synchronous and asynchronous communication you have, and what sort of heartache ends up with that. For those of you that use iMessage, one of the features of iMessage is when I send a text, if somebody's replying, I see the little ellipsis moving. And there was a whole commercial that came out sort of making fun of that you're waiting for that person to respond, and you're waiting, and that sense of anticipation. So that little break in time really can mess with our heads and mess with the rest of society. Now, technology breaking time and space is nothing new. So we usually call out the printing press as being the first example. That took an oral tradition and it made it durable and it made it portable. That happened around 1500 plus or minus 100 years. Then point-to-point communication and broadcast enabled people to communicate who weren't co-located. So you didn't have to be in the same room to have a conversation anymore. And then recording enabled you to break time, meaning I could take information and I could store it and then I could revisit it at a later date. If you look at all of these things, think about the industries that they changed and the societal norms that changed. The answering machine meant that when my mom called, I didn't have to pick up the phone if I didn't want to. So it starts to really profoundly change every aspect of society. But also, think about the span of years that are there. It's about 500 years plus or minus. Now fast forward to this, and we've got all of this digital stuff. This is 20 years. And in the last 20 years, we've had 3 different new mediums come online. We've never seen anything like that before. So change is inevitable. What are we going to do with this? So if you slide the 21st century to 1995, 95 is when I put the line in the sand for when we went digital. That was the year Netscape went public. Most everybody here is old enough to remember Netscape. When I'm talking in class, I'll say Netscape and the students look at me like, what are you talking about? But internet in 95, mobile in the early 2000s, and now immersive VR, AR, and I lump AI into that, although AI sort of speaks to all of this and cross cuts. But those are 3 profoundly different communication mediums within 20 years. Turns out that humans don't adapt very well. We're very slow to figure out, not only from just a use, but think about policy. How long does it take policy to catch up? And how long does it take your IT department to deal with BYO devices? So we've had this sea change, and it really is changing everything. And at the heart of it is digital. Digital is fundamentally different from humans. And I have a whole other talk that I won't go into on how I think those 2 things are vastly different and can never actually be joined. So digital has some great things about it. It's infinitely scalable. So I can just throw another server on the fire and I can get more services and give it to more people. It's portable, so my data can go everywhere. 15 years ago, Steve Jobs had the vision of 1,000 songs in your pocket. Now you have infinite songs streaming to you wherever and whenever you want. And it's easy to modify. Photoshop is now a verb, and I can mix and I can remix content. You start to think about all of the implications of these abilities. Turns out that digital has a dark side. One of the dark sides is it's infinitely scalable, so people expect 24/7 uptime and complete transparency and availability to things. My data can get off and walk away without me, and then finally, Photoshop is a verb. So the implications of these things are, it's positive because now as the user you get a vote, and this is one of the hallmarks of virtual reality. You get to choose where to look when you want to look. That's a very different paradigm shift, and it breaks almost every law of linear narrative that we've evolved for telling stories on screens. The first 2 on this line don't exist anymore. They're gone. They're never coming back until we're fighting with sticks and stones and Skynet goes active. The last is persistent. And any of you that have a phone are being surveilled right now in one way or another. Location services is a great benefit, but there's a cost associated with it. And we need to make those cost-benefit analysis in a thoughtful manner. This is, I think, the most profound one, and we don't really understand the implications of it yet. There's no such thing as evidence anymore. I can Photoshop an image to make anybody do anywhere and look like they're at any point in time. I can do the same thing with video. And police cams, body cams, and whatnot, what people don't realize, and this is something that filmmakers actually have known for a long time, there's no such thing as documentary film. Every film has bias. The camera, once you choose an angle, imports bias into that. And so the body cams have bias. That doesn't tell the whole story. Getting to AI, some very smart people are very worried about AI. Of course, it's funny that 10 years ago, AI was a bad joke. Everybody made fun of Siri when it came along, and now it's going to lead to the destruction of the civilized world. Then again, I pulled 2 articles from today. So Elon Musk says that none of us are going to have jobs, so we're going to be on the government dole, and of course AI is going to destroy the internet. So that's a very dystopian vision of this. So Keiichi Matsuda did a great piece. I encourage you to watch the whole thing. This is basically an augmented reality display. So you've got your Google Glass version 3. This is on a bus in Medellin, Colombia, and you're getting location-based information thrown to you. We can do most of this now, actually. The displays need some work, but the capabilities are all things that exist technologically. Cost to benefit, knowing points of interest, having the streets look actually pleasing, but then when traffic comes, it then changes and then warns me about impending dangers. So there are some great benefits to society there, but there are some kind of scary things that are going on. So I think our big issue is you have to be thoughtful about this because there's a thing called Internet of Things. And already people are saying it's too late. The distributed denial of service attack that took Twitter down 2 weeks ago was led by webcams, not by huge, powerful servers. And it was probably done by a non-state actor who got tools to do this on the dark web, and then for grins decided that they were going to try and take down Twitter, and they did. So AI is going to be a piece of this. That's kind of, and I don't want to scare everybody, but we need to, as a society, be thoughtful and understand the implications. I would argue that a lot of the challenges that we're facing right now is because we embrace digital without really thinking about it. Electronic health records, it's awesome that I can go to my doctor and then my doctor share information. Electronic health records led to our family, extended family, being scammed because hackers stole that information. And the worst thing is, I can't even pinpoint where it came from. It could have been from 3 places: UCLA Health, Anthem, Blue Cross, USC, or OPM with the government, because I used to hold a security clearance. So I was hacked, and I can't even pinpoint where the source was. So as we cede more and more control to machines and algorithms, I think part of our discussion is going to be, how do we make sure that we do that in a thoughtful way? What are the possibilities, and then what are the implications more broadly on society?
Yes. Awesome. So great overview. All very thought-provoking. And sort of taking it back down to what's happening now in the industry, what's happening here in entertainment with respect to AI. Seth was recently telling me how he blew up his life as a Wall Street trader to essentially create imperson and to start this awesome world of chatbots. Why don't you first start by telling us, what's a chatbot?
It's actually a good question. I'm not sure. A chatbot is an interactive interface that allows you, a user, to put in an input and it gives you something back. In the case of what we're using it for, we're using it for brands to speak to their customers, for entertainment to speak to the audience. I'll give you some examples of some work that we've done in the past year. Zootopia was a very popular movie this past year. When they decided they wanted to do the digital release of it, they were looking for different ways to promote it. The main character from the movie, Judy Hopps, had a very pronounced personality, and they found that they wanted her to be able to speak to their audience as well. We created a chatbot conversation of Judy Hopps, where on Facebook Messenger, we attached our engine to it with conversations that were pre-scripted by Judy Hopps, taking users through sample cases that they could help her solve. It was as if they were speaking to Judy Hopps. They were speaking with a character that was scripted by writers. It wasn't programmed. We used technology, but we used writers to use that technology to create these experiences. And in this case, we created an immersive experience that helped promote the movie. We're speaking to a lot of different brands as well in terms of customer service in order to understand what the customers want, to help them through problems that they're having, but more to introduce products and to actually get them what they want. Think about it as if a website shows all the products that a brand has, a bot can be used as a great salesperson. And a salesperson is great when they get to know you. In that case, it's about building a relationship. The amount of data that a chatbot platform can remember about the user is endless. It depends on what you design for it. The benefits for the user is if I like blue shirts, well, actually black shirts, and I had this discussion with the bot that represents a store. The next time I come in there, it knows what not to offer me and what to offer me. So it can be very service beneficial. It's lumped into this world of AI. We like using the word AI. AI is basically a very general term until we have a term for that segment. So for example, GPS, that everybody uses navigation services, that was AI 10 years ago. Now we just call it navigation. So as you find a usage for it, it drops out of the world of AI.
We've got one variation on the chatbot. I mean, for us, we build a lot of virtual humans. So in your case, did you have an avatar, an instantiation, or was it a text-based bot or audio-based?
So we've done many of these. This one with Judy Hopps was text-based on Facebook Messenger. We've done experiences on the Amazon Echo, where people can have full conversations with a character on there, with a salesperson. We're working with Skype as well. You know, any open platform we could work through there, but it really, eventually, this ends up in a live robot. I tell people, everybody knows what the world looks like in 50 years. It's pretty simple in terms of this area. We know there'll be robots amongst us. We know that there'll be a crossover between utility and personality there. These are the small steps that you take to get there. The combination of chat technology with VR, it's a natural connection there. Because eventually when you're in this world and you're there, you're going to want to interact with characters in that world. So all these, over the next years, will start crossing over into each other.
So we have a project where we've been doing this with the Shoah Foundation, started a couple years ago, where Shoah Foundation has been capturing Holocaust survivor stories for decades, audio and video recordings. And we do a lot of virtual humans, and they're either synthesized in a game engine or we can do video capture. We've also done a lot of high-end graphics for the film industry, for CGI work. And so the project started with one Holocaust survivor, and we did 360 capture of them, but basically interviewed them over a week. And so we've got 1,500 questions and then their answer. And then what the system does is it uses our AI, our natural language recognition system, that again goes less towards information retrieval, which is what Google does, and more towards conversation, which is hard. Conversation is way harder than the information retrieval is. But then you can now you can see this Holocaust survivor, Pinchas Gutas, and you can ask him questions. So it's not just watching the video, but you can ask him about where he grew up. You can ask him about his family. You can ask him about the Dodgers, and he'll have an elegant response about that. Or you can ask him about rap music or whatnot. You have to program all of those things in and sort of do the eventualities. And it was featured on the Today Show, and then we have a holographic display where you can do it. But this capturing, and then the two last weeks we've been doing more captures. This week was another Holocaust survivor, because they want to build these up, and it's been in the Illinois Holocaust Museum so that kids can go interview the survivors. But then the week before was a survivor from the rape of Nanking. And so it was this Chinese woman in her mid-80s speaking in Mandarin with a translator, and then you will be able to go up and have conversations. And I think, the commercial aspect of this is clear, that you will want these conversational agents helping you. I think we're looking at them for healthcare. We've done a lot of VR for treating post-traumatic stress, but then doing this capture in historical creations and recreations, and sort of capturing these stories and these narratives that are going to go away because we have generations that are passing. Then that begs the whole question of sort of hubris, and there's some in the tech community that want to live forever and they want their brains to be. We actually had a very rich guy come in and get scammed because he wanted to live forever. I prefer Steve Wozniak's response to that, which is, I've done a lot of things, I've lived a great life, I want to get out of the way and make room for someone else. So.
And I saw the demo of one of these Holocaust survivors that Todd's mentioning, and it's amazing. In the video, it looks so real. Like the movement is real. It's like they're right in front of you. And so to that point, it sort of plays with you, like what's real, what's not real, or do you feel like you're interacting with that person? And I think one of the really cool opportunities that we've been discussing is just the amount of customization and personalization that can go into these technologies to create new types of entertainment. Why don't we talk a little bit about that, the sort of deep relationship you can have with the end user, the customization that can be created?
So I think it's what's happening now, especially with endless memory that could be stored online, the amount of data that you could store, the customization is starting to grow tremendously. Our relationships with people is nothing compared eventually to what a computer could have. At best, we do okay with most relationships, and our failures are mostly based on things that we forgot about the people we're involved with. We forget sometimes what they like or don't like. We forget about mutual occurrences that happened, and it affects our future relationship with them. Computers don't have that problem. They get it right. When it's stored in there, they make the right decision with you further along. It's tremendously beneficial when it comes to entertainment or to sales. But again, on more practical, if you had a robot living in your home that actually understood your medical history and got it right each time, the difference of not making a mistake in that area is tremendously beneficial. I think you'll see that this relationship will start to grow. I know what we're doing right now. The conversations that we have, that a user has with one of our bots, the conversation grows the next time. It's not a tree. You don't look at it like a tree. It opens and closes decisions that are made. Decisions are not just user initiated; they're initiated by the bot as well. The bot does have its own goal. That can be determined both before a conversation or happen dynamically during the conversation based on how the person's acting on the other side.
I think the challenge in that is that if you go to the logical extreme of this, or if you go to sort of, you said 50 years down the road, right now there's an emerging issue in the AI field about trust. So we do a lot of work with the Army on training soft skills, leadership, cultural sensitivity, decision making. And this whole idea of man-machine teams is becoming a real thing. Between drones right now are already out there, other autonomous agents are going to be out there. And I think what it comes down to is, when does a human trust the algorithm? And how do you make the algorithm transparent enough so that someone can build trust? On the one hand, you have a good amount of the population that is doing blind trust. I mean, we click through EULAs and don't read any of it. And you are basically trusting that the company is not written. There was a great South Park episode about this.
Saw that.
It was completely disgusting, but South Park, I highly recommend, if you want to keep up on what is relevant in culture, watch South Park. This year is all about trolls on the internet. There's a political thing that's going on, but trolls on the internet. The year before was drones and virtual reality, and they're poking fun at it, but they're picking up the things that are problematic about these new technologies. So the trust of the algorithms in it is an issue, and this is where I differ strongly with some of my colleagues in my own shop. There is a big push to make virtual humans and to make technology more human-like. And their theory is that that will lower the impedance and allow it to be more useful for us. I'm of 180 degrees, which is actually, I want a further separation of church and state, and I want to know what's technology and I want to know what's human. And so I don't want a virtual human that looks like a human and acts like a human. I want a useful agent that does what I want it to. But in order, and this is this trade-off, right? It's a yin-yang thing. In order to get that high degree of personalization, that means that I have to expose more and more of my life to that agent. I don't have Google Home and I don't have Alexa, and I'm not going to get them anytime soon. I have colleagues at work that love Alexa because they can have it set timers while they're cooking, and you know, the commercial for Google is you tell it to turn down the stereo at a party. And I looked at that and I said, you know, if I'm at a party and I have other humans, I'm going to turn to the human and ask them to turn the stereo up and down. I don't want the machine doing it, and because so much of our agency has been taken away by automatic transmissions, and pretty soon it's going to be autonomous cars, the act of going over and turning on and off a light switch is actually something that I want to retain as a human. I want a sense of accomplishment by going over and it sounds stupid, but I worry about, and this is where we want these technologies because they are going to change our lives and they're going to be useful. They're going to save lives, absolutely. But I also don't want WALL-E to become a documentary.
It's a great film, by the way.
If you haven't watched it, I need to go back and watch it, but it really, in there is a lot of this talk about humans giving away what it means to be human. And I think the challenge is, how do we make the technology empowered to make our lives better without stripping away what it means to be profoundly human? And that's a hard one. I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, it's funny. I teach here too, and I tell my students all the time, since my focus is, the class is called digital media, and they're allowed to use computers and everything they want to take notes, but I tell them, don't let it take over. Be bored in here for a minute. I'm not going to be entertaining all the time, so it's your human right to be bored and not always be entertained and doing something. Like, just sit here and be bored because I'm talking to you. But on the not boring front, I think one of the things that you'd mentioned to me that I thought was really cool is the fact that you could go to a movie and it would be different for every person based on what they were interested in. So there would be no, two endings that were alike depending on your personality and who you are. Is that something that is going to happen? Is it going to be feasible? How does this happen?
Yeah, but there's a lot of work there. There's what we refer to as the authoring problem. So when we do a lot of training scenarios, and inevitably we know that story is what makes things sticky. So this is what we learned from Hollywood. You have to wrap information in a narrative. And I think what you guys do is you have narratives of characters, or you're capturing the user's personal narrative, and you're reading it back to them in some level, and that's how we connect with it. Creating that narrative is really hard, especially if we're doing counter IED training, so we have to learn about roadside bombs and then understand how to fold that into a narrative and get the training across. If you're making a story that has multiple endings, you run into the terror of the branching narrative. And we've known this for about 30 years doing interactive media, that the minute I get to a story and then give you a choice, now that branches, and now I have two stories going. So it's 2 to the 1, and now if those branch, then it's 2 to the 2, and pretty soon you're at 2 to the n, and you ask any writer to write me 256 endings for a movie, and they'll go nuts. So the way that this will get solved is we've got some researchers working on scraping blogs, and there are millions of stories that are out there. Using algorithms to scrape those stories, identify noun, subject, verb, identify act 1, act 2, act 3, and then regenerate those things a priori on the fly. Google's doing this with music. There are algorithms that are, quote, creating art. I don't like any of the output yet, but that's how I think you're going to have, that's the only way to get to this type of thing, is using algorithms to create these stories and then figure out where they connect with the person.
So we actually look at it a little differently. A story is not linear. There's no, as you go into the interactive world, it's not a matter of 200 different endings. It's 200 different paths through the conversation, through the experience. And that includes variables along the way. So right now, when I write an experience that lasts 15 exchanges, which ends up being in text anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, I'd say we end up with somewhere around 1,000 different possibilities. Because the user's path through there is dependent on what they said, which could send through many different variables, even in the same statement. An intelligent conversational bot will be able to give many different responses, either randomly, based on what the user say. It might be time of day. You know, the difference of coming in and saying good morning versus saying good afternoon makes that conversation different already, which is different experiences that the users have. I'd say instead of the common way of looking at this, I think because of scripting that was done for plays originally, was looking at a narrative as this leads to this. Gaming did the same thing. Gaming technology is very tree-oriented. Instead of taking one line down, they take 5 that branches off. What we have looks more like a neural network. When you go back to the stem, choices are made of where to go next. It's not that when scene 1 is done that you go to scene 2 or 3. You can go from scene 1 to scene 6 and then back up to 3, depending on the path through a conversation. Those are normal human conversations. So I think interactive movies will have to take this into account at some point.
Well, and I think the games, there are some games who are more exploratory. Alex McDowell would talk about world building. And we look at this for both AR and VR, which is you embed the narratives in the world and then you let people explore them, and it is very nonlinear.
And there are eventually boundaries. There's boundaries in the real world. The VR movie is not going to have you walk through the wall probably, the same way you can't walk through it in real life. So there are always limitations to how many narratives that could be there just because of the physical boundaries. The question is at the beginning, how many paths do we allow people to go off of? If there's a path, do you put water next to it so they can't walk off of it? In order to make it somewhat more contained to control it, eventually we'll let more people explore more, but we'll control that exploration as well in the entertainment at least.
Well, I think there's an interesting phenomenon right now in VR with filmmakers. So the industry right now has jumped headlong into VR, and there's going to be a lot of financial heartache in 2017 because their VC money is being pissed away into VR right now, and it's not ready for prime time. And the reason is that they don't understand this fundamental change that's happened. We have 100+ years of screen language. We're very good at telling stories on a screen, but that screen has boundaries. VR removes the boundaries. Now all of a sudden, my 3-act play falls apart, and you have to think about the problem the way that you just elucidated, which is not what they have been trained to do as they've been brought up. So the filmmakers now are saying, oh, it's okay, we're going to shoot with 360, we just need to figure out how to hide the cameras, and then what we'll do is if the user looks this way, we'll use a sound effect to get them to focus their attention here, or we'll put a boundary of a lake so they can't go there. And then my response to that is, well, then why not just put it on a flat screen? Because you're basically tricking the user into going your path that you've already determined for them. And the whole idea of VR is that you've removed the boundaries. And I think this is the promise and the challenge for AI will be you run into boundaries. Right now, our virtual humans can be very smart for narrow slices of the world. But once you get out of what their sort of model, what their knowledge model is, it falls apart, and you have to build in what's called sort of elegant failure, right? Mm-hmm. If I have a virtual Abraham Lincoln and you ask them, how about those Cubs? Lincoln wouldn't know that, and so you have to have the foresight to program in and say, I don't know what you're talking about, or some sort of device like that. As we get more and more of the data, because we do have stores of infinite data, could you conceivably then make it so that that thing would automatically do that and you wouldn't have to do that beforehand? In other words, can I make a model of Abraham Lincoln where it automatically knows what it knows and what it doesn't know, and I don't have to sort of do that beforehand? And that's this sort of machine learning aspect of, if we've got these algorithms and we've got all this data and you can tell the algorithm to teach itself what it knows and what it doesn't know, then that's how you get around the authoring problem as well.
So switching gears a little bit, we sort of talked about a lot of cool things that are happening in this space, and we've alluded a little bit to some of the problems. I wanted to dive a little bit more into some of the problems, both from the advantage standpoint, but also the legal problems, the ethical problems you've seen coming up. And we can start any place that you feel the most passionate about in terms of problems.
Okay. I could give you some real life problems that we've seen already, because we do have bots that have been out in the open market. Filters, not on what the bot says. Listen, when I create something for the studio vets everything that the bot will say. It's a criteria here. They don't want an incident like what happened with Tay. We do have learning mechanisms where the bot can learn from the user. We've shut it off completely right now for any commercial product because the studio has stipulation they want to read every line the bot could say. What they can't control is the user. If I have a bot that is telling somebody that they did a great job, and then I have a user that decides he wants to trick it by telling them I'm going to commit suicide, and the bot comes back and says, great for you, that's a major failure, and we've seen people test that. We have filters built in, as crazy as it sounds, my suicide filter can handle somebody saying, I'm going to drink a bottle of bleach. Now, the major platforms like Facebook actually put responsibility on people to report these incidents. If somebody's speaking to a bot, they don't see it as any different than maybe being in a movie theater and somebody's saying, I'm going to blow up my school. That needs to be captured and reported. So these are real problems that have already occurred. We've seen these. We have ridiculous filters built in for every one of these types of things, of how to respond, one, to protect the IP, but two, to act in the way you're supposed to act by law, by the standards of the different platforms at this point.
I think there are going to be massive policy issues. One example is in medicine. So we have a collaboration with the Keck School of Medicine Center for Body Computing, and Leslie Saxon, who's a cardiologist, is head of that and does a lot of work with body sensors and human performance, works a lot with the NFL, with Red Bull and their high performance team. They have a conference every year, and the last 2 years we've had hackathons. So we've done virtual reality hackathons, so people come and create these experiences that are medically based. We were trying to look at generating empathy, so we did a cardboard one 2 years ago, and then had another one for this year's. We did one, and what came up, and then we have a virtual Leslie. So we, on a phone, we scanned her. There's a virtual version. You can ask her about your medication or whatnot. So this idea of virtual doctors is the thing. So your doctor 24/7, don't have to make an appointment, always there. There's AI that's running that gives you some capability, and then if your filters kick in, right, then it sends you to a human. We had one of the heads of FDA there at the conference, and he said, you guys are going to have to help me figure out how we regulate this stuff. If you notice, all of the biosensors, or most of the biosensors at this point, call themselves fitness trackers. Same with apps on the App Store. The minute you call it a medical device, it triggers a whole other set of approvals that you have to go through. So the reality is that these things, algorithms, are going to become medical devices. Whether it's a chatbot, you have a medical chatbot. How does the FDA approve those things? Who's responsible if it goes wrong? How do you do the vetting? What does a set of clinical trials look like for a medical application? So health is going to be massive. Education, conceivably, traditional schools could go away. And the instructors would all be bots, chat bots, and they're doing project-based learning, and they're doing sharing virtually and working across the globe. How do you do accreditation in that standpoint? I was meeting this morning with a guy who's starting up an independent school, and he was talking about a startup company that does assessment of learning, and they've got this automated tool that looks at all of these factors. And they said their angle was that basically the Ivies plus Stanford dictate everything. All of the standards, how many AP classes and whatnot, and then that the testing organizations feed into that. And so she's trying to get them off of using the testing standards as their gold standard, and then their other gold standard is how many of their graduates do they place at McKinsey? Because that's a beneficial sort of, that looks good to them. My argument to him was that the universities are so slow to move. I mean, they are literally aircraft carriers to turn, and all of this digital stuff is just going to transform it. And the minute that companies do not require a college degree as their gold standard, then the game's over. And that's happening right now with game and technology companies. My son is a sophomore at USC in the games program. He's writing text parsers for fun. He could get a job right now. He wouldn't really need that college degree. So then that begs the question, what good is the college degree for? Well, socialization, and one of the main things that I try and teach him, which is how to manage expectations of yourself and the people around you. I've found after 30 plus years, it's one of the most important skills I have is managing expectations. That's what your job comes down to at some point. And so how do you learn those things? How do you become broad? And instead of being high school and college, maybe it's no, you get to a certain point, you have a skill level, you then start a company. I had a group of freshmen come, pitch me an idea for a VR project over at the campus. They had a pitch deck. They had a 4-person company. They hadn't done their LLC yet, but their deck had their milestones, deliverables, everything. This is a freshman. Sophomore, same business. He's ready to take the company out. So what I want to do is maybe that we don't need colleges anymore. Maybe instead we want to enable lifelong learning so that when he burns out at 28, he drops back into some sort of educational scaffolding to learn about Hamlet, because maybe he wants to do that, or take an art class, or study with somebody who do some sort of mentoring. So this stuff is going to radically disrupt every single industry. And I think the verticals of health and education are the two biggest ones. Entertainment's going to get rocked, but I think entertainment still, there's enough of a base that it's going to be okay for a while, but I think that could change radically too.
But you'll see, in terms of retail sales, even at this point, there are issues here. If I create a bot that speaks as a salesperson, do I need to be transparent about that? If it's, there are no rules on this.
That's the trust part
It is.
of it.
So, listen, what we found is that for the most part, we've done mostly entertainment. People go in, they suspend their belief. It's no different than going into a movie theater. You see someone flying on the screen, no one gets up and shouts, that's impossible. So you go into this type of experience, you buy in. But if I'm speaking to a store and it's a salesperson trying to help me, do I care? Is it my responsibility to say, hey, I'm virtual? Do I only need to do it when they ask? Even if they ask, if I'm good enough, do I need to? There are no rules on this at this point. No rules need to be written one way or the other, guidelines for it. You'll see this in many other of these types of industries at this point.
Virtual attorneys.
Yeah, it is the Wild West at this point with this. It's moving much faster than anyone can keep up. Governments do not get it. It'll probably be settled in courts, and then they'll write laws for it.
Absolutely. So I'm going to take some questions here. Let's start with a legal-focused one. This should be interesting. Did it go up there? Okay. If an algorithm writes a story, who owns the IP? And along the same lines here, there's another one that says, who owns the copyright on a robot-created content? Can a robot be creative or innovative?
So I'll channel my attorney ex-wife who taught me well, and the answer is it depends.
You've been trained well.
Yeah. This is something that's got to get, I think IP law, and it's dangerous because you guys definitely know more than I do, but from my foxhole, IP law is pretty broken. Digital really screwed with it. More so that, it was having problems, but digital has really kind of screwed the pooch on this. Right now, I think the story would be if whoever creates the algorithm owns the IP of whatever that algorithm creates. But the problem that you have is that we live in a remix and additive society. So you only need to look at open source software to see what a mess this is. So we put out open source software, but it depends on what license you use. Because the different licenses have different dependencies, and in some cases those dependencies extend, and in some cases they don't. So if I make an algorithm that does something and then somebody uses my algorithm to then into their algorithm and pulls my libraries in, then do I have a right, and do my IP rights dilute from that standpoint? That's another thing that's probably, I don't have a good answer for that. That's what you guys need to figure out.
Carl, Jay, do you have any thoughts? If a monkey is the copyright owner of a photo.
A thought crossed my mind that the theories for why we have copyright don't necessarily apply very well to AI and robots. Do we really need to give incentives to them to create stuff? Do we need to? They certainly don't have, I think, personalities that are extended into their works.
But somebody created the algorithm, and they may have an incentive, right? I want my algorithm to be better than Sony wants their algorithm to be better than Warner Brothers' algorithm.
And that would suggest that they should be the one that own the exclusive rights, I guess, given the mess you described, if a whole bunch of people start adding on to it.
Yeah, you take someone like Google, shares so many of their algorithms with everyone. So a lot of the basis for a lot of creativity in this world of AI right now is based on a lot of the Google algorithms. If that's the case, because I manipulate their algorithm, do I fully own it at that point? Is part of what I created open to everyone at that point? Right now it's being treated, basically, if I'm using it, it's my creation, what comes out of it. I'm not sure how that'll hold up going forward.
And robots can't be creative yet.
Maybe.
Well, I think creative is, if I listen to algorithmically created music, I don't find it compelling yet, or algorithmically created art. It's not the same as going to but it has elements of it, right? It depends on, it's kind of a semantic thing of how you define creative.
Okay, here's another sort of forward-looking question that I think is interesting. Will AI develop to a point where they will have some level of rights? That is to ask, will there be protections for AI that are lifelike with developed personalities because they are so human-like? So are we going to have a whole legal system to protect robots?
Well,
someone's saying no way?
I'll give you an example to think about. Take a personality that's been built over 20 years that has relationships with people. Can you take it offline? Can you kill it at that point? It's a living entity in some form. Just because it was created by man doesn't make it less living. There's an ethical question possibly there.
So we make a lot of virtual humans for training purposes. They do role players and whatnot, and we at our lab we had a full-size guy. It was one of our employees we did a high-res facial scan, and then he's wearing a Navy uniform, and he stands around all day, and if somebody comes near, he snaps to attention, and then you can have a conversation with him. And at night, it's funny, my old colleague used to say he'd walk past, and he's going out the door, he's like, he would have to turn the display off. He couldn't leave the character on the screen all night. He felt bad. And so even if it's this is a guy, Mark is now up at Microsoft Research Lab. Brilliant researcher. You form relationships. Her kind of was pointing towards the fact that humans want to have a connection and want to have a relationship. And this, to me, is the power and the danger of humanizing the algorithms. And it gets down again to this trust issue. There are, if you watch Futurama, this topic has been addressed about whether the robots have rights, and the robots all go on strike, and then all of society falls apart. So there is some of this, be careful what you ask for, and why we have to be very thoughtful as we go down and sort of look at these type of things that we would reject as being crazy now. But if if you told someone 150 years ago that we would be talking to everybody around the world on a little tiny book, and that in December I'm flying to NASA and we're talking about doing habitat design for trips to Mars, and people would say, no, you're nuts. So the world changes.
Let's see. Okay, this one's a more practical question. How many years until more than 50% customer service shifts from India outside US to chatbots via web?
Years. I'd say right now a chatbot could probably handle maybe 20 to 30% of that conversation, and then hand off to a live person at that point. Now, listen, there are companies like LivePerson that are doing even better. They're not as focused as a chatbot. They do the handoffs there. I think that there's a good chance, if I wanted to bet safe, I'd say 20 years, it's 100%.
Is it sorry, because that was my question, so I can
Yeah.
Is it so Amazon, the first time when we do Amazon customer service, we're talking to a chatbot, correct? Or no?
It depends. They mix with these things. It wouldn't surprise me that at least the first exchange is with a bot at this point.
Do they have names?
We humanize,
Yeah.
again, the question
Anthropomorphize.
is it to humanize it, or is it just to make the person feel comfortable?
And usually the name is responsive to someone that you would think is outside. You're corresponding because the name you're thinking
Yes.
is outside the U.S.
So even
Right?
if it is a person, the name that they give you is not their name.
Right.
So they're giving you a name that you're comfortable with. So whatever part of the world you're in, they're going to give you the name that you feel comfortable that's your customer service.
Could you also do the AI to say, I know that you have 5 friends that are Mike, and so you're going to like Mike better.
It could get there. Is that an abuse of it? Maybe.
I mean, the key to chatbots is familiarity, right? So the more they know, the more you will feel comfortable and you'll trust them. If I had to put a number on 50%, I'd say 2020, and maybe before then. Again, for the triage portion, right? So that first escalate, before you have to escalate, 100% will be done by chatbots, I think, by 2020.
The next follow-up question that I have this one is, what does that do? I'm sorry, but this part. What does that do to the economy of all the customer service people in India and everyone else?
So there is no economy anymore. If you want to look 30 years from now, we're talking about autonomous cars in the very short term. So if you want to, again, safe bets, 20 years, do you think there'll be a person driving a car?
No.
So that's what, 7% of the workforce? You can go into many different areas. We have robots that'll be performing surgery, okay? So maybe instead of 20 years out, you need to go 40 years out. You want to go 50 years out. At some point, all these professions disappear. What happens? Where do we go from there? We don't know. It's not a matter of falling apart. It's a shift at that point. Life should be better. If you look at a world where we get to spend our time doing other things, maybe furthering our knowledge, but there is a fundamental shift coming. If you want, the White House put out its first paper on this about 2.5 weeks ago. They put out basically the world that's coming. They dealt with the next 20 years, and they talk in that paper about handing out money because jobs won't exist for certain parts of the population. They didn't publicize this much, but if you go on the White House website, there's a 50-page paper on this.
What's it called?
It's AI. I'll think of the name.
Yeah.
Something,
I have an email on it. I'll look it up and tell you afterwards. But
And I'm worried about a broader, the sort of expanding beyond the there is no economy, which I think is true. And this whole idea of the sort of Uber economy is a bunch of nonsense. And we're seeing that now, right? The sort of shared economy and spare time economy is ridiculous because Uber's play, right? The amount of money that Uber lost was directly related to the number of humans they pay. Once they have driverless cars, they're profitable. So this was just an interim step using humans until they could get it fully automated. What I worry about, and this is something that the military worries about, is what muscles are we atrophying that we actually need to be exercising? So for instance, I really am not very competent at riding a horse. It turns out that doesn't really impact me very much. 150 years ago, it was probably more important for me to know how to ride a horse. However, I know how to read a map. Right now, most people under the age of 30 do not know how to read a map, unless it's on a phone, and even then, they're waiting for step-by-step instructions. The Army is worried about operating under what they call degraded environments. Degraded environments means I have no cell signal or someone's blown up the GPS satellite. That means that I have to use a compass and a map. So for map reading, I've tried to get my 19 going on 40-year-old son to understand how to read a map because I think that that's a skill that he may not need today, but he may in 5 or 10 years need to know how to do. The people in kindergarten right now, if you have kindergartners, odds are they will never learn how to drive because driverless cars will be a thing. Driverless cars depend on a number of different technologies that could, in a degraded environment, go down. So is learning to drive a skill that we need to keep alive? I don't know, and I'm not trying to be dystopian, it's just I think we need to think about the things as a society, the skills that we are letting lie fallow, and the ones that maybe we need to sort of keep alive just for the fact that, well, humans actually are genetically hunters and gatherers and need to navigate. When you think about it, the only thing that you have left in this world as a human is the position of your body right now, where you are. Everything else is probably in digits and is spread all over the universe. So your physical body and your location is the only thing that you possess anymore. And so the ability for me to go somewhere else and know where to go is something that I need to be able to do. What's going to mediate that and how we're going to do that, I think the digital stuff enables all of these great capabilities, but then again, our tagline now in our lab is, okay, now what? What are you going to do with it when the robots have taken your job? So do we pursue music and art? Do we pursue knowledge? Do we pursue leisure? Or do we just sit around and put on our VR goggles and spend 18 hours a day in virtual Hawaii? Don't know.
And on that topic of, driverless cars and robots performing surgery, I think one of the things that we talked about was who's responsible? Is it the robot? Is it the platform? Is it who is legally responsible for things that go wrong? Car crashes, deaths on the operating table. Who holds that responsibility?
So, listen, an algorithm is going to decide on the proper course of action for a car that goes into a skid because it's raining outside or because there was something on the road. A driverless car, autonomous car, no matter how good it is, there's environmental changes that will definitely cause accidents. At that point, some algorithm will decide what's the least destructive action that needs to be taken. That will sometimes result in injury or death. If it acted accordingly and did what it was supposed to, is there any measure there? I think these are the things that need to be considered. Just because someone got hurt or killed, does it mean something went wrong? Is payment for this a punishment for something that went wrong, or is it just some form of payment because something happened to somebody. It's going to be between companies that own this. There probably will be no insurance company, okay, because there will be mega companies that own this. The autonomous cars, let's say, will be owned by Google and Uber. That's it. So they'll decide between the two of them what the payments that need to be made. A lot changes with this.
So last question. Well, first of all, the White House report, someone found it. It's up there if you guys want to write it down. Thanks. I feel like thanks for whoever sent that in. And this one's an interesting one. So last question of the day. What gender issues arise in this space?
All of them. I mean, this is part of the move to digital, which was we now have virtual versions of ourselves. And I gave a TEDx talk. If you're really a glutton for punishment, if you Google TEDx, and I was at TEDx Venice Beach in 2013, gave a talk about the digital analog conundrum and the fact that I view virtual humans as kind of the Manhattan Project of the 21st century. It could go really well, but it could go really wrong as well. There are virtual versions of yourselves, and you get to pick and choose. So I can go on Facebook and I can be female if I want, right? I can go into games and I can choose my gender. It's interesting that there are games that actually do, or some let you choose the gender and some don't. Like everybody is male. There are other ones where there is no gender. It's essentially genderless. So what this enables is for people to do very elaborate ruses. Again, there's no evidence anymore. So if I want to change my gender or my ethnicity or my age in a digital realm, I can do that. It's easy. And I can provide corroborating evidence because I can Photoshop myself as anybody I want to be at any point in time. So it comes down to it's the trust thing again, right? How do you build trust with these virtual entities that are running around out there, whether it's a chatbot or a person behind it? You know, if you're on forums or if you're on Facebook, how do you know that that Facebook person is actually who they are? Facebook demanded people use their own names, but that hasn't prevented abuse of the platform, because never underestimate the ability of humans to do exactly what you tell them not to do.
We're hackers.
It is what humans do. We break rules. The saying that there's an interesting saying or lore that the Army has tons of doctrine. And so in World War II, the Russians had all of our doctrine, which basically says, if this happens, then you do this. The reason that the U.S. was successful in World War II is that the soldiers didn't follow U.S. doctrine. They improvised. That ability to improvise is something that is profoundly human and actually confers a competitive advantage. When algorithms are able to improvise, that's when it starts to get interesting. Because right now, they're pretty predictable. And while they've beat the Turing test in some cases, meaning people can't tell if they're virtual, it's still within narrow constructs, but it's getting better and better. And then once machine learning comes into this, and you have infinite data stores for them to draw from, can they be creative? Can they improvise? Depends on your terms, but all of this stuff about gender, race, identity is essentially up for grabs. You can create your own identity. Just like the digital democratized music production and remix and video, and iMovie didn't make everybody into Spielberg, but it certainly enabled infinite number of cat videos. And those cat videos make people money. There's a whole economy around cat videos on YouTube. So it's real. Who's more important, Lucas and Star Wars or cat videos on YouTube? I'm willing to bet that cat videos on YouTube generate more income than the last Star Wars movie did. I could be wrong, but I bet it's a horse race. If you look at the number of clicks and the ad revenue behind that's driving that. So yeah, that's a very long answer to a very confusing space that we're in right now.
Well, on that note, everyone be frightened and enthralled all at the same time.